So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. I think actually this is going to be the one that falls on or very near to the 3 Christmas days, so it may be Christmas Eve or through to Boxing Day that this will actually see the light of day, which is kind of a fitting one, I suppose. It's a very wintry landscape out there, though we won't be seeing too much of that. I'm sure that you can see, based on the map itself, that this is going to be another capital showcase, essentially, a faction capital, and this is the revamped version of Erebor. We'll get on to the interior of the settlement in just a moment. Obviously very grand from the outside. Bears a little bit in common now with some of the new architecture that we saw from, I think it was Gabilgathol, was it not? Or Thorin's Halls, perhaps, the Blue Mountains Dwarves settlement, which we saw way back when the patch previews started to come out. We are going to see Dale and Erebor themselves on the defence, of course, and we will be seeing the combined forces. I think it's pretty much only Angmar. No, Misty Mountains are here as well, so we've got a force of orcs which are going to be attempting to wrest control of this grand settlement away. It's pretty big. I would say that in terms of interior spaces as well, there is some choke points to be had on the inside. Also, we've got the forges here, lots of nice little details. That's one of the main things I think when it comes to a lot of these map revamps, is there's just a lot more detail going on than it was previously. It used to be that it was very much more of a layout for a battle really than anything that was actually in use for anything else, but this is looking pretty nice indeed. And of course, way back over here you can see that the stores have been a little bit depleted. Erebor have been busy spending all of the treasure, it would seem, but the treasure room there, we've got also the town centre way back here at the back, so plenty of options for movement throughout the settlement and areas to stand and defend in. First and foremost, of course, the gates. This is also the first battle replay, I think, post channel update, or it should be at the very least, so hopefully we can put into action some of the things that were said there. But let's go through the attackers first and foremost, as we often do, of course. Mr. Sneakman here playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, Black Uruks, who are actually going to be a fairly important unit here. The Misty Mountains, of course, have not got the best quality on their main line. The Black Uruks really are the exception to that rule. They can kind of punch above their weight in many respects because of their numbers. They're not the most expensive heavy sword units either. They will struggle a little bit against the armour of the dwarves, but especially against the rank and file of Dale, I think they will prove to be a pretty damn efficient unit as long as they can avoid getting shot up too badly. We have the Goblin Kingsguard over here, one of the more efficient sword and board bodyguard units. Again, it comes down to numbers. The Misty Mountains are always going to lean more heavily on that. It's always going to be one of their best, if not their best feature of each of their individual units, as well as the faction as a whole. And the Goblin Kingsguard having just more multiple HP infantry units within these Goblin Kingsguards really does give them that extra leg up on their opposition. There's almost certainly hidden units in there somewhere. What they could be is anyone's guess, but we'll see them phase in, I'm sure, later on in the battle. The Moria Spear Guard, marching from one captured dwarven hold and attempting to gain control of another. The most efficient mainline unit that the Misty Mountains have, because they're more defensively adept than the infantry. They have the shields as well, which means they don't have, they're not hard countered essentially by archers in the way that the halberdiers are. And also, they're just generally a pretty damn good unit for the cost that they are. Of course, they're not going to outmuscle units that are of higher tier than themselves, not on their own, but because of the sheer numbers of them, because of the little bits and pieces that they have going on offensively and defensively as spears, they are pretty much the backbone of most Misty Mountains infantry forces. White Uruk Fearmongers offer a pretty good, actually, halberdier unit in terms of what they offer. There are better units of this type in the game, but again, White Uruk Fearmongers are pretty numerous for what they are. Armour-piercing phalanx as well is going to be useful if they can get it set up, especially against the Dwarven defenders. Of course, Erebor have got their own answers to that in melee and at range, but one of the ways that the Misty Mountains, aside from numbers, can try to deal with that Dwarven quality is by employing the armour-piercing that they do have in their roster. Speaking of which, the Moria Halberdiers over here, pretty much a lower-end version of the White Uruk Fearmongers we've already spoken about, and we've already mentioned how as soon as their formation gets broken, their stats are pretty low. They're going to be pretty easy to deal with after that, and they're also very weak to archers, but they are cheap, and ultimately they can be very efficient as long as the attack is well constructed. So they are going to be supported directly by 2 times over here, who's playing as Angmar. He's got the Witchround Blackguard, which we've seen be pretty impressive recently. It wasn't quite enough in the end for them to defend their own capital, but maybe they can take another one to replace the one they've lost. Guardians of Kharn over here as well, an important unit in Angmar's repertoire, and just in general Angmar on the attack. Everyone knows what they're all about. They are very much all about that upfront strength, and they achieve that by having some pretty good defensive stats, so good armour, good shields. Armour attack might be a little bit of a problem. They're not going to be able to deal damage quickly, especially against the higher tier dwarven units, but that's not really the point of the Guardians of Kharn or Angmar as a whole, really. They have a few fast damage dealing units, but for the most part they're all about outlasting their enemy, and it's what makes them such a menace on the attack, really, especially. Several units of these Guardians of Kharn as well. We also have the Blackwatch Legion. It's actually been a little while since we've seen an effective mass push employed. Maybe this can be the time for that to happen. The Blackwatch Legion, of course, can push through enemy units. Huge shields as well means that stuff like the Dalian archers are going to be less of a concern, though dwarven crossbows and any artillery are going to be an issue for them. And recently mass pushes have failed because they've tried to push through enemy positions and they haven't been supported quickly enough. And of course they can fall apart pretty quickly. I mean, stats-wise they are okay, but for what they're being asked to do, it's often too much for them if they don't have immediate support. Trolls have been, well documented in terms of their improvement in this new version of the game. Trolls of Angmar are pretty numerous. They're obviously not as individually strong as stuff like the Olag High or Trolls of the White Hand. As we have seen in the past, the Trolls of Angmar do have a tendency to fall away fairly fast. It's probably one of the areas of Angmar's roster where they don't have maybe quite the same level of survivability as their fellow Orcish factions, but they're still going to be capable of dealing damage quickly, though the Dwarves and Dale are well positioned in their own ways for dealing with especially slightly lesser trolls like this in a timely fashion. Troll catapults are going to try and use their artillery. I mean, if they can set up artillery within the settlement, it could be a real problem for the defenders, because it's the constricting nature of dwarven holds in particular means that you have to pick a position and stand. If you do that in the wrong place and a catapult starts ripping you apart, there's not really much you can do about that, so there is a bit of jeopardy here for the defenders if they do find themselves caught out by that. The trolls themselves can still be useful later on in the battle as well. Angmar halberds, very similar to their Moria halberdiers that we've already seen, with the same strengths and weaknesses really. If they can be used efficiently, they could be very, very useful, but it's going to be tough for them. Angmar marauders as well, very basic unit. They're going to struggle quality-wise, but that's not why they're here. They're here, of course, for their numbers, and that's going to be one of the main things which the attackers will need to employ, because oftentimes in these dwarven settlements, the positions that you can take up as the defenders are very advantageous. So there's going to be no getting around the fact that the attackers are going to be taking heavy losses, and the Angmar marauders are here for that very purpose. And finally the Barrow Wights, very, very useful for Angmar, because you can throw them into a real meat grinder and they will stay fighting for a long, long time, even against forces like the upper end dwarves. They won't win the battle all on their own. Their damage is relatively low. It's not really what they're all about. They're there to keep your attack going for as long as possible. We'll see if they are able to do that. Over here we have Boris, the Soviet Lovehammer. We have got some more Moria Spearguard pushing up the ram, plenty of Moria Spearguard just in general. Unsurprising to see more of them. Moria Halberdiers with Black Orcs of the Mountains involved as well, so a pretty good front line. No shields involved here, which may be a bit of a problem if Dale get their claws into them, but still, as far as damage goes, no complaints there. We've got some heavy goblin crossbows, so for the most part you would imagine that the crossbow war is going to be heavily weighted in favour of the defenders, just because Erebor can pick and choose where they stand, but attacking crossbows in the past have very often been the source of many a defensive loss, because you only need to get one advantageous position for a crossbow unit for the attackers and you can do really bad damage. The defenders need to conserve their manpower and their strength more so than the attackers generally, so crossbows can be a real hammer blow for them. But again, they are pretty vulnerable to enemy archers as far as crossbows go. I think the runic ones unupgraded are still a little bit more fragile, but it's very much in the mould of if Dale can start shooting them down early, that would be good for them. But two units. The Blackback Mountain Berserkers are over here, so we saw the Goblin Kingsguard from the other Misty Mountains army. This, the more aggressive unit, of course, and it will be pretty useful for them to get into a fray with the Dwarves for the attackers, because they are capable of dealing damage to any fellow bodyguard tier unit. They have got some fragilities, comparatively speaking, but I think that is outweighed by the fact that they do need some damage dealers to start breaking through lines and doing damage quickly. We'll see. Again, in terms of 1-to-1 against most Dwarven and even the Dalian units, they may still lose, but having that damage and supported by the numerous goblins is still going to be useful. Drake Broodlings, another line-breaking kind of unit, really similar to the Blackwatch Legion that we've already seen. They do so in a different way, however. They're more like living battering rams, and momentum is everything. If you can keep them carrying through the enemy lines, you can really sow chaos, which will be much more useful for the Orcs than the defenders on this occasion. So we'll see, but narrow Dwarven corridors, they could end up getting caught, and as soon as they get stopped, momentum gone. It's not quite as bad as chariots, but they will start to melt away fairly fast. And finally we have Froggy playing as another Angmar army. Looks like a fairly dense cluster of units over here. Some Trolls of Angmar, some Blackwatch Legion once again, the Witchram Hammerguard, which are absent from the other army, interestingly enough, which is strange considering they are the best infantry unit that Angmar have for deployment against the Dwarves in particular, with the huge arm-piercing damage those big warhammers of theirs deal. But it is an expensive undertaking, and the Blackguard ultimately are maybe a little bit more of a safe unit to have. They're not going to get picked apart as easily by ranged fire and the like. More Trolls of Angmar, plenty of halberdiers in here as well. No, actually no, Gundabad Guard. Similar kind of weaponry, but Gundabad Guard, shielded, good unit of spears, kind of similar to the Guardians of Kharn. The only difference being their armour is not quite as high quality, especially not when the Guardians of Kharn have got an armour upgrade. They do have an anti-cavalry bonus. They are slightly cheaper than the Guardians of Kharn as well, but kind of on that same sort of tier, you know, upper mid-tier of unit that Angmar can use again with their own defensive twist. And plenty of Guardians of Kharn as well, albeit without the armour upgrade here, still with their rusted aesthetic. So, let's move on to the defenders then, shall we? Starting off with Eclipse, who sent me this battle replay, and he is the source I have for suggesting that there's going to be more of these showcases now that they're at the sharp end of development. They want to be having a lot of these maps completed and sort of shown, I suppose, so that's good to hear. He's going to be playing as Erebor, of course. Ironfoot crossbow is going to be an absolute staple of this defence. Angmar may be resilient, but under sustained and focused crossbow fire, there's really no faction in the game that's going to weather that storm effectively. We've got some Dwarven miners, of course, in a 4v4, which I believe this is. The defenders are going to have to cut some corners in terms of quality. Dwarven miners, though, still should do okay against the entry level of the goblins and Angmar, just because of that extra little armour-piercing edge those pickaxes do offer. But against anything of higher quality, they're going to struggle. Their own defensive shortcomings will be made pretty apparent there. As we make our way through, you can see the walkways crisscrossing around. Ironfoot pikes, one of the shielded pikes in the game, and it definitely fits Erebor's aesthetic, I think, so it gives them a little bit of extra protection against archers. Not going to be the most important thing here, though. Neither the Misty Mountains, especially not Angmar, are well known for their archery, but here it's going to be all about trying to clog up those attacking lanes. Interestingly enough, Angmar didn't really bring any Witcher-armed pikemen of their own, so I think they're going to be pretty comfortable in terms of pure melee, the Ironfoot pikes, as long as they're supported properly, of course. Ironfoot warriors, the bread and butter unit that Erebor have access to, again, those axes, should be pretty good and pretty efficient against most things that the attackers throw. I think the Guardians of Kharn defensive stats are such that it's not an ideal matchup for them, especially with the Ironfoot warriors being unupgraded as they are, but other units will definitely be able to pick up the slack there, and it's a combination between them and the pikes which are going to be what Erebor are going to be depending upon here. More Ironfoot pikes here in the sunlight streaming through the gates. More Ironfoot warriors here. Then just in behind we have some upgraded Ironfoot warriors as well, so they're trading in their axes for short swords and packing on a little bit more of that infamous dwarven armour. Should be interesting to see. We have the Dwarven catapult, the Dwarven ballista, or the Iron Ballista as it is known. Erebor legionaries manning that as well, so 103 of them in addition to a ballista crew. Why would you not bring it? And it's in a pretty nasty position as well. Only one artillery piece for the attackers, and it's on the other side of the map, so Sin will be very happy about that. More Ironfoot crossbows forming up a secondary line over here, and Ironfoot axe throwers as well. You can see that they also have the armour upgrade, so going to be more resilient there. Axe thrower is well documented for how much damage they can do, and especially in a settlement like this, the dwarves will definitely be hoping to do as much damage as possible. Pretty much entirely comprised of Ironfoots here on this front line, but there's nothing wrong with that. The warriors and the pikes backed up by the crossbows and the axe throwers, a few miners and the ballista as well. As we make our way back into the forge room over here, we've got more dwarven miners, forming up a little bit of a cheap but possibly effective reinforcing column, especially if they can get that charge bonus off. Iron for axe throwers as well, 2 more units of them, so definitely a rank and file army here from Eclipse, but I think that does mean the extra numbers. The key is going to be whether or not these supporting units can do the business for him. I think his bodyguard unit is back in the town centre, which we'll get onto in just a moment. The connecting pathway, so the town centre at the back, and then each of the gates, it's connected to one another, but you also have then a direct route to the town centre as well, so it's a bit of a honeycomb-esque web that Erebor is in the middle. Cannon fodder is going to be playing as Dale, Bardian Marksman. Of course, one thing that Erebor do lack is long-range archers. That's something that Dale certainly don't lack. It's the main strength of their faction as a whole. They're not going to get much return fire, but the Bardian Marksman can get involved in melee when all is said and done as well. Maybe not as effectively as dedicated infantry, of course, but everyone has to do their part. So the fact that they do have some abilities in melee is going to be important as the game wears on, and also basically uncontested archery superiority means they can pick and choose their targets for the most part. Crossbows, though, may have something to say about that. Just down here we have the Dalian Swordmasters. They offer certainly a little bit more in terms of quality than stuff like the Black Uruks, though less in terms of numbers, so it's interesting to see how that particular dynamic is going to play out. River Patrol, much like the Axe Throwers, albeit here we have Javelins, going to be important for really supporting at close range the front lines, doing that armour-piercing burst damage, especially against Angmar over on this side of things. Barding Herd as well. We've already seen Halberdiers over on the other side. Barding Herd, one of the most well-rounded units of halberds the game has to offer, just because they do pack on that armour. They are defensively quite adept. They have a slight shield value as well from the shields they wear on their backs. So just in general, when you compare them to many of their peers, that extra defensive boost just puts them a little bit higher up on the list. And obviously the main attraction is an armour-piercing phalanx as well, which without any pikes on the opposition team, at best they can even the odds. Dalian Spearmen representing the front line. Again, Dale have got quite a lot of dependable frontline units. It has been slightly expanded as well, with the Dalians gaining access to more of a rank-and-file swordsman in the same mould as these spears. I don't know whether we're going to see any of those over here. Looks like it's mostly just Dalian Swordmasters, spears, the Barding Herd, and then the River Patrol. We do have a unit of the cavalry as well. Iron for Hammer Guard. There's going to be Sin's bodyguard unit. Actually, you can see Gimli riding with them here at the back. Potentially as well, very, very deadly. Not really any cavalry on the outer area, although crossbows, they're a pretty effective anti-cavalry tool in their own right. Over here, meanwhile, there is another pathway into the settlement on this side as well, a little side gate. We have WK playing as a second Dalian army with Dalian bowmen. They don't have quite the same level of well-rounded stats as the Bardian Marksman, but ultimately that doesn't really matter. Uncontested archery is still the name of the game here. 2 units on either side. Further in, yes, over here, he does have the Dalian infantry, so this is the sword and board version of the unit. They also have the armour upgrade as well, so they'll be pretty comfortable against most things. Like with the Ironfoot Warriors, I think they will still be slightly outclassed by stuff like Guardians of Kharndoom, but that's more just from a defensive standpoint more than they're going to take damage really, really quickly. And of course, supporting units means it's not going to be battles fought in a vacuum anyway. Upgraded Dalian spears and more Dalian infantry as well, so dipping into those armour upgrades. We have over here another force which is in range immediately actually. Dalian bowmen going to be able to shoot down the cliffs if they so choose right away. And then as we make our way back up through the settlement as well, plenty of winding pathways here. We do have some Dalian Swordmasters and Barding Herd offering some more finesse and more damage overall as well. Making our way back into the settlement as well. The pathways are long and pretty arduous for the attackers over here if they choose to try and double down on WK's position. 2 Dalian spears. There's more units around here as well. I mean, there is another gate over here, but it's a long old track for them to take. We'll see if they do. Dwarven Miners from Sin. Earls of Dale are here as well, the mounted variant. So another cavalry unit. This is a more defensive cavalry unit, which wasn't entirely needed, I guess, given the lack of cavalry that the attackers seem to have. Although recently we have been seeing quite a lot of cavalry in sieges, so maybe it was more of a preventative measure from WK, and it can still be used effectively, of course. Blacklocks, very deadly unit of crossbows. Interesting that they're way up here. It might be that in the town centre fight they become more important. Ironfoot crossbows, of course, we have already mentioned. More Ironfoot crossbows as well, making our way towards the town centre now through this winding side passage. We have the feast hall. Ah yes, the classic dwarven pastime. Look at all those kegs. Unbelievable. Dalian infantry once again. 2 units of Dalian infantry. So going for a lot of their rank and file here, WK and Eclipse especially, which is, like I said, possibly the wise move to take. And then finally back here in the throne room, 2 units of River Patrol for support. Dalian Swordmasters. Interestingly as well, we do have the Wind Lancers. This is something which has been in the works for a little while. This is the first time we've seen it. A unique Dalian Ballista, of course, modelled after the Wind Lancers. We have had sort of handheld versions from the Dragon Slayers for quite some time, but this is sort of the full fat version, if you will. Interested to see how that gets on here. Back here, Dalian Paladins, massive amounts of armour piercing damage from them, of course, as well as big armour. We've got more Barding Herd, more Dalian Spears. We do have the Dalian Royal Guard in there as well. Nice heavy swordsmen combined with being heavy archers. Not the best ground for archers to take, but I'm sure that they'll move forward and try and use the increased elevation to their advantage. We've got more Ironfoot pikes in amongst some Erebor legionaries as well. One thing which we haven't seen, I don't know whether I'm just blind here or not, but I'm sure during the setup phase when I was skipping through at times 6 speed to get to this moment when the battle's about to begin, I'm sure I saw the Dragon Slayers trackers. Are they over here? Yes, they are. So we've got the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin and the Dragon Slayer trackers. So the Dragon Slayers, we know from previous versions, high-end bodyguard unit, armor piercing, pretty much all the bells and whistles you would want. One of the most well-rounded units of sword and board infantry that the game has to offer, if not the most well-rounded. And then we also have the Dragon Slayers trackers, who are axe throwers, as well as wielding those big two-handed axes as well. So really, really deadly pair of units. There's possibly the most high-quality examples of units on the field today. Maybe the Witchram Hammer Guard would have something to say about that in the Dalian Paladins, but the Dragon Slayers have the track record to back them up. So I think we will make a bit of a cut, because I think there is going to be a little bit of a track for possibly Mr. Sneakman to get all the way around to this gate over here before the battle actually starts. But we'll see. We might get underway pretty quickly if WK decides to open up with those archers of his. So yeah, I'll rejoin when the battle is about to start. I do wonder if this is going to be a little bit lopsided from the attackers, purely because of the distance some of them have to travel just to get into position to start attacking the gates, but Froggy is going to be put under immediate pressure from these crossbows, and I imagine that a similar sort of thing indeed is already going to be happening here at the front gate, with Cannon Fodder's Dalian archers going to be doing some damage to Boris's goblins as they make their way forwards. The Moria Spearguard, the shields will come in handy. You can see they are dropping away fairly fast. It may even be more advantageous for them to simply front load on this position at the front of the settlement over here. The attackers go for maybe one of the armies going up that way, 2 going for the main gate, that sort of thing. Just because the amount of time it's going to take for 2 times to get all the way around to the other side is going to be pretty substantial, you would think. Another way up over here though, a building. I mean, a building means that they won't be able to break their way through that way. There are a few examples of straight up walls that can be utilised as well, however, from an attacking perspective, trying to crumble them down. Meanwhile, and you could argue that only a unit of basic Moria Spearguard like this, not the most important unit in the world, but they've taken so much damage here that if this continues, will they even be able to batter the gates down at all? More of them dropping with every volley. Though as they get very close, of course, the angle will no longer be on Dale's side. To get damage done, however, that will be the sort of thing which the attackers will be hoping for far more of. 9-foot warriors taking up from where the crossbows used to be. Crossbows giving Angmar a little bit of leeway by the looks of things, which is an interesting thing to note. As Angmar begin to stack themselves up, I mean, in terms of siege equipment, do they even have what's necessary over here? Have any rams? They do, but it's pretty far away. So perhaps Froggy is fortunate that Eclipse has decided to show a little bit of mercy there. Plenty more damage being done. Mr. Sneakman's Misty Mountains army also coming through this way. So for now, avoiding the secondary path up from the front end of Erebor, as the Dwarven gates begin to be battered down. So far it is entirely Moria Spearguard that have taken the initiative and headed towards the front gate. I don't know whether they'll start pouring in immediately, though they will fancy their chances a little bit more against Dale than they would against Erebor, you would have to suggest. Much of the Dalian front line being made up of spears, but even so, with stuff like the Barding Herd and with the very close support of javelins and archers, Dale should still be fairly comfortable against the Misty Mountains. If they're only committing one type of unit forward, I did mention how the Moria Spearguard are a pretty well-rounded unit, I should say, for the Misty Mountains to use, but they will not be able to accomplish all of their goals on their own over here, and the longer that these units linger in front of the gates, the more that these Bardian marksmen are going to be able to deal damage and start whittling away at the Misty Mountains' most important asset, of course, which is their numbers. As more spear guards start to fall. Meanwhile, Barrow-wights shambling towards the gates. They will be able to stay standing even against the higher tier offerings that Erebor have, though as we mentioned, Eclipse in particular has bought more of a functional army full of regular Ironfoots and the like, so his best bet for dealing with the Barrow-wights quickly might be the Ironfoot axe throwers, keeping them pinned with the pikes. 2 units of them though. I mean, it's not a huge force from Angmar this, but that may also be the issue that both sides run into, is it's not really going to be too easy for each area of the battlefield to reinforce one another. Erebor and Dale may have a slightly easier time of that, purely because they can go through the settlement, but the size of the settlement on the inside might be a little bit of an issue there as well, so everyone is, to an extent, on their own when it comes to dealing with this. Moria Halberdiers now being targeted down, not surprising at all. Lack of a shield. The armour is not of the highest quality either, so they will continue to take losses. Black Orcs in behind as well, will probably be an even better target if they were to move forward, but that's unlikely to happen. Right from the off, Goblin infantry on the way forwards as well, clad in the same rather ragtag armour, but every little helps against the Bardian marksmen, who've been having a bit of a field day so far. Starting to head up that way as well. Goblin infantry, I mean, Bardian marksmen being retreated from the walls now that there is an immediate threat to the Dalian Swordmasters, though. Very easily going to be able to deal with much of the Goblin threat that has made itself known here from the front. But it will at least stop Dale from continuing to do their thing there. Going to immediately start pouring units onto the walls as well. I imagine this is going to come in tandem with an attempt to break through the gate as well. We shall see. Still, 2 times slowly making his way to this gate over here. Going to need to start making something happen in double quick time there. Ah, lovely. This is another one of those mechanical eccentricities of a map like this when you're talking about very tall architecture. Have to bear that in mind moving forward, I think, but Orc fellas waiting. I mean, all of these units very close to the walls now. If Eclipse were to change his mind and put crossbows right on the front after all, it would prove to be a bit of a problem. He could take his pick of targets. Siege towers spinning on the spot, waiting for the time being. And, I see that I was speaking too soon. This is a very common thing to happen, put the siege towers in place and then wait for a bit until everything else is set up and ready. They begin to slowly make their way up here, WKs, Dalian archers, having to... I mean, this is a rather weird unit shape for the Moria Spear Guard, and it's actually helping them in a sense, making it more difficult for those Dalian marksmen to actually hit their targets. Goblin infantry. Dalian bowmen. You know, these positions, I mean, they are walls, so yes, this will be a structure that the siege towers can actually position themselves on. Battering down the gates as well, so Angmar, hang on a moment, going to have to bear that in mind. So are they just waiting for 2 times to get in position on the other side as well? I mean, this wall over here is completely unguarded, so they shouldn't. They should just try and occupy the walls while they still can. Get the orc fellas on there. Bit of armor piercing as well. Individually pretty weak, pretty fragile, but able to deal damage to the dwarves at the very least. The gates also now fallen. Orc fella's going to occupy the other side of the walls as well. You don't really want to use ironfoot crossbows to deal with them either. Even miners. So I can only assume that Eclipse is going to intend to allow the attackers to occupy a forward position like this. And I suppose with Angmar that's largely okay because they don't have really the ranged nous to be able to take advantage of the fact that the walls have been taken uncontested. Unlike the Misty Mountains with their crossbows, that would probably be ill-advised, but considering this is how things have shaken out, that is how things are going to proceed. There is something. Ironfoot Hammer Guard. They're just going to make it, I think. Very, very close. Ooh, some of the units getting stuck for a small amount of time there, but easily recoverable from. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard buzzing around this position is going to be a real pain in the neck for 2 times, you'd imagine. Really dangerous kind of unit. Are they going to be able to get a good charge? Going after the Witchround Blackguard. Is the charge going to land? And they actually did manage to kill off one of the troll catapults. And the problem is when units collapse in on them like this with trolls, and Angmar do have their halberds as well. Keeping the Hammer Guard moving is going to be key, but definitely worth keeping an eye on. 2 times has left some of his units behind as well to help with the push on the front over here. Gates getting battered down. Have they started moving in? Yes, they have. Not really very successfully for the time being by the looks of things, but the goblins have established something of a beachhead. The Mountain Orc Berserkers in first. They will stay in the fight for longer, of course. But Dale, also the Bardian Marksman, some of them out of ammunition at the very least, so entire ammunition supply is utilised there, now being used as a melee unit. Another gate falls. Moria Spear Guard on the front line, but it looks like they're trying to burrow through, but I don't think they have the wherewithal to do that just yet. They're going to need more moving through that gatehouse, I think, and they're going to need also to try and keep pressurising the walls. I mean, with the Misty Mountains numbers, as we said, that should be doable. Dalian Swordmasters have taken some losses, but certainly nothing that's too crippling. Barding Herd here will be the linchpin of the Dalian defence. Any defensive attributes that all of these goblins have will come from their shoddily constructed armour. And those halberds will be able to crunch through that no problem at all. Bardian Marksman positioning themselves, Dalian Spearmen. Victory seems certain, only a fool could lose this battle. So far so good for them then. Meanwhile, over here, the walkways now being crashed. I mean, there are 3 choke points for the attackers to choose from, but the dwarves' combination of the pikes and infantry should do pretty damn well. Here we see like the bug that it's a really weird thing that happens with the Barrow-wights because of their low mass, I think it is. They sort of get bounced through units. It's very bizarre, but it's not really going to be of great help to them here, I don't think. Not unless they're able to have a more organised mass push in addition to this. The Barrow-wights will at least keep this attack going for longer. We did mention the throwing axes, of course. One of the better choices perhaps for dealing with them because of the high base damage. Any that hit the trolls will be appreciated as well, I'm sure, because the trolls are the best choice of dealing with this kind of dwarven defence. The Ironfoot warriors are pretty good as far as a line infantry unit goes at dealing damage, but not to the extent that you need against the new patch version of trolls. And the trolls have always been a good tool for dealing with pikes, let's not forget. Good bad guard there. And over here, kind of similar. Only here in the middle they don't have the benefit of the Barrow-wights, it's just orc fellas. They're going to be relatively easily held at bay by the dwarven pikes as they continue to pour in through the main gate. All the way across over here. Similar as on the other side, only actually a little bit more serious. The Gundabad Guard in first with the Barrow-wights in support, and then the trolls moving forward as well. The announcer fancies the chances of the attackers, but again, really high hit point units like the Barrow-wights can skew things in that regard, and trolls as well, of course, so we'll see if that actually does pan out by the end of the battle. The dwarves with it all to do here, crossbows trying to take the odd pot shot. This is where the more functional army that Eclipse has gone for will actually hurt him a little bit, I think. The trolls of Angmar pretty well positioned to deal with that kind of force. Well, over on this side of things, Dalian bowmen ready, pouring in through the gates as well. We have Moria Spearguard, and the Dalian infantry will fancy their chances in terms of unit type to unit type. The Dalian infantry will have the edge here, and they do have the defensive position as well. I'm a little bit surprised actually that the Dalian bowmen have not been pressured in melee just yet. That is going to happen now though, by the looks of things. Blackback berserkers which will tear through them. So a good opportunity here. There's a unit that's been positioned in the rear as well. Sin's Ironfoot Hammer Guard leaving 2 times his area and instead going to try and take some chunks out of the Misty Mountains force. Warrior halberds ready to start marching their way in as well. I mean, there's a pretty significant force here from Mr. Sneakman. And as he starts pouring units in, bodyguard units to deal with the archers, numbers to try and crack through the rank and file of the Dalian army. This could be where the attackers start to really gain some yardage within Erebor itself. The main gate, on the other hand, will the Misty Mountains have the numbers to be able to deal with Dale over here? Once again, I'd make that error. Snow trolls moving in. And again, much like the trolls of Angmar, they don't have the same level of survivability as the trolls from Isengard and Mordor, but they are in and amongst things here. Spears won't have the damage to deal with them. Halberds, a little bit more so. Dalian Swordmasters can do good damage as well. Snow trolls not as armoured as many other types of troll either. River Patrol. Haven't really seen the River Patrol get into a good position to throw their payloads in here, but that is entirely possible. Up up on the walls as we speak. Goblin Kingsguard actually completely ignoring them. Interesting choice, but it is another bodyguard tier unit that's going to be down here on the ground. Trying to put cannon fodder's Dalian infantry line under real pressure and succeeding for the moment, you'd have to say. Meanwhile, Ironfoot Hammerguard, meanwhile, able to go after the completely undefended heavy goblin crossbows. Dealing with them is a real win for the defenders if they can make that happen, but the Drake Broodlings intent on defending their goblin counterparts. And the Hammerguard. In the Hammerguard you would actually probably back them in a static fight against the Drake Broodlings, but the Hammerguard have bigger fish to fry. So good use of the mounted unit here from Sin. They're an expensive unit though, so more work is still needed to be done before you can declare them a complete success. Meanwhile, over here, Angmar, the only force actually to knock down one of the sections of wall. WK's Dalian Spearmen in real danger of being overrun here by the initial infantry assaults. And again, this is the problem. I mentioned how reinforcements might be an issue, and that the defenders at least can use Erebor's interior to help one another out, but the distance they need to cover, and in situations like this, Sin too busy microing his cav. The Ironfoot crossbows have now been compromised in melee. Will these Angmarim be able to continue this without routing, is the question. I mean, they've managed to crunch through the Dalian front line. Ironfoot crossbows up here on the gatehouse, and Dwarven miners beating the Angmar marauders for now. Well, there goes Sin's general. Halberdiers and Drake Broodlings hounding the Hammerguard. At best, you would say they probably broke even, based on what we've seen. Ironfoot crossbows firing a few volleys into these Angmar halberds, presumably to try and rout them at this point. And over on the other side, in the shadow of the forges, the Iron Ballista, these trolls trying to get after the high ticket items, if you will. This side of things is where Angmar were focusing their efforts. The trolls, the initial Gundabad Guard, and they followed that up with Blackwatch Legion in and amongst there, and Guardians of Khan Doom. So concentration of force has been effective for Angmar, as it often is. Arguably the very best faction in the game at doing this sort of thing, and the dwarves, underprepared for it, are going to need to start reorganising themselves pretty quickly here, the defenders, otherwise they could find themselves on the receiving end of a landslide. Yeah, good. Really good assault this from Froggy. Now they're trying to hot-foot it away, the dwarves, as much as they possibly can. Going to have to take the long route around. The direct route back to the town centre compromised, so they're going to have to go that way instead. The side route into the forge. The problem that they have is they can retreat just fine. Cannon Fodder's army, however, has been outright defeated. After some initial positive signs, the defenders appear to be struggling a little bit. Dalian Swordmasters broken and fighting to the death. I mean, it's not as if the attackers haven't taken losses over here, but they'll definitely feel as though things have been acceptable within those bounds. Over here, I think WK will have started to retreat before now, just based on how much progress the attackers have made. Instead, going to opt to put on a bit of a final stand over here, because WK's retreat, of course, will be cut off by the attackers that are going to be able to make their way up through here. Although routing, a little bit thin on the ground, the resistance over there. If they were going to try and retreat, WK, he still does have the option of doing so, but he has to do it now. Maybe the risk is simply too great. Instead of getting defeated so easily, maybe an organised last stand will help matters a little bit more. Combination of Dalian Swordmasters and Barding Herd good enough to put up a really solid fight against anything the Misty Mountains and Angmar have to offer. Just in behind, Angmar Marauders and more of the Moria Spear Guard, so plenty of numbers still. They need to do some pretty significant damage when it comes to trying to defend their town centre, the defenders, if they are to try and make up for the deficit that they now find themselves suffering under. But still more than half of the battle to go, so there's still much more of a story to be written. Dalian Swordmasters want to push their way forwards, which takes them away from the support of the Barding Herd, which is a little bit peculiar. They're a strong enough unit, the Dalian Swordmasters, but they're certainly not extremely high tier. Comes to getting attacked from multiple enemies, they're not going to have the staying power against this kind of force. Further back, I mean, this is a huge amount of units heading up here. Dale have got, I think, what was it, 3 or 4 units still up here. Meanwhile, full armies from the Misty Mountains and a sliver of the Angmarim army as well from 2 times. Over here, Trolls of Angmar continuing to move forward, some of them simply bypassing things entirely. Things have started to devolve into a bit of chaos, you would sense. Units running around all over the settlement, good defensive positions and organised areas being cut off from one another. All of this very much favours the attackers. I think I'd have to concur with the announcer at this point that defeat seems almost certain for the defenders, but it's not impossible they can make their way back into this fight. The main gate. Boris making his way forward, finishing off a few stragglers, look to be a few of the river patrol that remained behind. It's a straight shot for them to the town centre, making their way through the treasure hoard, but they're going to be able to take... Well, I mean, if they can link up with the other attacking forces in tandem, that would probably be the way to do things now. Eclipse reorganising his front line. Crossbows need to probably move away from the enemy rather than towards them. Orcfellas do rout. So far the forges offering cover to the attackers from the danger of those crossbows. And then over on the other side, again, a relatively short pathway by the looks of things. I mean, relatively winding and labyrinthine, but there is a river patrol unit from WK still over here. Dale still defending the feast hall as well, so Angmar not being given a completely straight shot to the town centre, and it was a little bit longer than I was remembering. But yeah, Angmar Marauders. So far it's mostly rank and file from the Orcs, which have done a lot of the work as well, just the swarm tactics that perhaps is the modus operandi of many a force like this. In these units, Dwarves are routing, Dalian Spearmen are routing, but they're kind of getting in the way of the Angmar Marauders now, so they are actually filling a role, funnily enough. Because Angmar Marauders will take some good kills from that though. Units that are routing have nothing in the way of stats after all. Whatever they were before they were routing, they are effectively no longer. That's why they all melted in the face of a unit as basic as the Marauders. Meanwhile, this marooned batch of men, the Barding Herd, now without the support of those Dalian Swordmasters who took the bizarre decision to try and burrow into the enemy army. Considering how many of them there were, that probably wasn't the play. The unit of Barding Herd probably going to make their way over here. Some of the Barrow Wights have once again jumped their way through enemy lines thanks to their lower mass. Axemen moving forwards as well. Whiter at Fearmongers, going to be trying to do some damage on the front line. considering, Barding Herd already routed. I think the problem here for the defenders, more often than not, what we've seen is the initial loss hasn't really been a surprise, but how they've reacted to each initial loss they've had has been a little bit slow, a little bit sluggish, and they've largely not done the right things by the looks of it. And so all the attackers have had to do is continue to trudge forward, and bit by bit the defenders have ceded more and more ground to them. We're starting to see a bit of a worrying situation now begin to develop, and 67 Barding Herd starting to rout. The defenders would be hoping to inflict more psychological damage on the attackers, but that hasn't really been the case so far. Dale not really best equipped to deal with such things. Dalian infantry still guarding this gap. Of course, there's still quite a long way for that force, mainly of Mr. Sneakman's Misty Mountains army, right off in the corner of the settlement as they are. They've got a long way to travel before they can make it to the town centre still. Meanwhile, the treasure hoard. Bit of an open position this in many ways. Drake broodlings, several of them falling away. Crossbows perhaps? Is that the... That's the iron ballista. I was going to say, I thought we might be seeing the winged lance for a second there, and indeed we may now see winged lance will be firing its missiles, manned by a force of the basic Dalian swordsmen as well. Some real effort's been put into this model as well. Lots of fine detail on it. Now, and based on the thickness of the projectiles there, it's more similar, you would say, to the Isengard ballista, maybe with... No, that's probably the closest comparison, but several unique ballistae now, which is interesting. Dalian paladins on the front line, they will be able to make short work of the snow trolls if nothing else can. And the Barding Herd setting up a good front line with the Dalian spearmen as well. Dale will want a bit of redemption in this battle, considering how their infantry has collapsed a couple of times already. Trying to keep the orcs of the Misty Mountains at bay. Dalian infantry moving forward, seeing an opportunity maybe. Moria Spearguard routing alongside the Dalian Swordmasters. A little bit of a counter-attack here. Eclipse has got his Dwarven Miners down here also. This is the sort of thing which the defenders do need to do, I think, with the attackers still relatively disparate across the map. If they're able to compartmentalise things and deal with some of the attacking armies individually, I think that is maybe their ticket back in to being competitive in this one. And I mean, the artillery is savaging Boris's army. How much can it withstand? We'll have to wait and see. Barrow-wights making their way up. Again, this is a bizarre decision, this, from the defenders. They've effectively left this area completely open. They had the axe throwers in position, so they knew that this was a choke point that existed. They just didn't have any infantry over here, which is weird. Managed to just about salvage it with those 100 Erebor legionaries, but are they going to be able to deal damage quickly enough? We will have to wait and see. Good close range damage this. Further back, Dragon Slayer's trackers. Good opportunity for them to utilise their ammunition as well if they can get into a good position, good angle. There goes a general. I mean, the Blackback Mountain Berserkers were there, so you'd have to assume that was Boris's general. In the Misty Mountains, let's be frank, do not do well with the loss of a general, so perhaps psychological warfare is still going to be a friend the defenders can rely upon. It seems certain thus far. Slayer's trackers still in place. Iron Ballista still firing away, and Blacklock Engineers firing at near point-blank range into the Barrow-wights and Guardians of Khan Doom that are making their way up here. Dragon Slayers of Erebor Mithrin and Erebor Legionaries pushing down as well. So we're starting to see more of the Dwarven quality now, which will ask more questions of the attackers and how strong the momentum they've gained actually is. Making our way back over to the Feast Hall. WK still holding on for now, starting to see a little bit more quality from Angmar on the front line now with Guardians of Khan Doom. There goes a Dalian General. Black Uruks of the Mountains doing the business, but it kind of depends how close these guys are 2 times, and the rest of Mr. Sneakman's Misty Mountains army still a fair distance off. Again, this is probably the biggest in terms of an interior for a siege battle that we've seen one of these custom maps be in a while. Almost as if the expectation is that much of it will happen within the settlement rather than purely on the outer walls, and so it is proving to be so far. Routing from 98 heavy goblin crossbows though, that is pretty significant. They were getting in position to try and return fire, but as it turns out they will not be allowed to, and the Black Uruks themselves routing as well, over 100 of them, so rather quick victories being scored against the Misty Mountains within the Treasure Hoard. Again, vital victories as well. Blackback Berserkers, only 10 of them remain. Dalian Royal Guard, what will they be doing? Are they going to get into melee? I mean, the Mountain Orc Berserkers won't rout, and neither will the Trolls, I don't think, but the Royal Guard will at least help make quick work of them in terms of just outright killing them. If the defenders can score a similar level of victory over here against Froggy's Angmar army, on the back of the Dwarven quality, we may be heading towards a photo finish, which would be good. Guardians of Khan Doom and Barrow-wights will stay standing for a little bit longer than the Dwarves would like, but I think their defeat is inevitable there, which are Blackguard managing to force their way around. But in the interim, the Dwarves have managed to set up a pretty good defensive position over here now. Blacklock Engineers pulling out their melee weapons now, getting involved up close and personal. 49 Dragon Slayers trackers still remain, although much of them are out of melee. Alongside Ironfoot crossbows, a lot of these units are out of ammunition skirmishers for the Dwarves of varying levels of quality, but all of them are the sort of unit you would expect the Blackguard to win against. It's just a case of whether or not they can win against this many of them. More units on their way across, Dwarven Pikes, more Erebor Legionaries, but Pikes were on their way across, but Trolls are the thing which have reared their ugly heads on the horizon now. We've already seen how effective the Trolls can be in Froggy's army so far in this battle. Will a similar fate befall them again? Barrow-wights and Orc-fellas. Ironfoot Pikes. Do they have much in the way of support? I mean, one unit of Erebor Legionaries. If they can deal with this unit of Witchround Blackguard quickly, they might be able to move over reinforcements, but dealing with the Blackguard quickly is not an easy task at all. Further back over here, I don't know how much ammunition the Iron Ballista still has. I mean, the Dwarves are doing a pretty good job at forcing the enemy back this way. They may yet be able to completely surround Angmar as they make their way up that other ramp if they're able to deal with this position quickly. More routing. But I mean, the Barrow-wights aren't going to be routing anytime soon, are they? There's a few of the Blackwatch Legions still remaining, but mass pushing over on this side isn't going to be happening, so I think it's just a case of Froggy wanting to get units onto the front line as much as possible. Elsewhere, Dwarven Miners trudging their way up. Dragon Slayers trackers still not really using their ammunition at all. I think they might be running out of time to do so. I don't think Eclipse, or Sin actually it is, can afford to be too fussy with what he's doing any longer. Meanwhile, it's a good thing that there aren't any sort of gravity mechanics in Medieval 2 for these Witch-Realm Blackguard, otherwise they would be getting forced off the edge right now. Trolls of Angmar. Witch-Realm Hammerguard on the front line as well. I mean, they are by far and away the most dangerous individual unit to the dwarves on the field today, and the dwarves are struggling. I mean, the trolls are falling, they've seen a lot of combat already. Now starting to ebb away in terms of their numbers. Over in the feast hall, meanwhile, I think Dale probably will have retreated at some point, leaving behind those Dalian swordsmen as a bit of a rear guard. Indeed, you can see some of the units fleeing. Meanwhile, sort of the sleeping quarters and the barracks and the armoury not going to be the site of any sort of prolonged fighting now. Angmar and the Misty Mountains begin to make their way through. Not a huge amount left in reserve. Indeed, I don't think the defenders have the luxury of leaving much in reserve based on how the opening stages of the battle started to go against them. They need to try and find a way of dealing with Froggy as quickly as possible, really. And then they can try and consolidate and see if they then have enough left in the tank to deal with 2 times and Mr. Sneakman, but I'm still not convinced. I think the way that the first half of that battle went, I think it was maybe too much of a hole for the defenders to try and dig their way out of, but we will see. There's still plenty of time left, and for each one of these trolls that falls, they will gain a little bit more belief in their chances. Troll Blackguard. Barrow-wights just stay standing, and that's all they need to do at this point. They just need to keep as many of these positions open for attack as possible. Even though Boris's army has fallen, another route into the treasure hoard is now going to be start to be pressurised by Mr. Sneakman's Misty Mountains army, and that initial defence from WK didn't really do much to blunt that Misty Mountains force, and they're going to be able to utilise their javelins surely on this front line to good effect. It's a solid looking front line, but if you can whittle it down with javelins first and foremost, in numbers like this, then you're in trouble. You're either going to need to try and attack forwards as the dwarves here, or completely abandon this defensive position, and there's a lot of javelins heading their way. Do they have elsewise as well? A few more forces from Angmar. Some heavier units of infantry. Snaga. There's still units of Angmar Marauders that have nearly full strength to them. It's a sign of how many of these entry-level orcs there have been. Not exactly a charge into melee there, more of an amble, but another front line opens up. Trolls once again on the way forward. Erebor legionaries on the front line should have enough damage to deal with already bloody trolls, however. Snaga in the background as well. Don't know still. I mean, Iron Ballista does still have a bit of ammunition, but whether it can thread the needle there, I'm not sure. It's a big ask for them. Firewights there. Sin's going for it, and I mean, I suppose it's worth the risk at this point. If you can bank the shot just so, the damage it can do might be vital. And that did. That was a good shot. Right into the heart of all of those units, and Whiteruk Fearmongers are a good individual target as well for that sort of damage. If they can continue to get hits like that, maybe all is not lost. Cannon Fodder's Dalian Paladins offering a good amount of quality. There's a lot of damage being done as well. I mean, for the Misty Mountains, they have the numbers to be able to sustain this, so they may as well try and stay the course, especially seeing as the Iron Ballista probably doesn't have that much in the way of ammunition left. What do we have here? The Wind Lance trying to do the same sort of thing as the Iron Ballista on the other side. Less of a priority by the looks of things, this attack. Certainly a less serious expeditionary force being sent around this way. Angmar Marauders and Guardians of Kharn alone for the time being. There's a few units in support, but I don't think they want to pile forwards with reckless abandon while that Wind Lance is still there with ammunition. Guardians of Kharn will have to be the sacrificial lambs on this occasion. Good volley of shots here. Might be all that's required. Only the one artillery piece appears to be firing with any sort of regularity. They'll need a bit more DPS if they are to get the best out of that. Some defending arrows, again speculative ones though, being launched up high, and they will hit something, but the amount of kills they get will be relatively limited. Could be crossbows as well. Yeah, crossbows, Dalian Royal Guard. Iron Ballista going to have to reposition itself. Meanwhile, Froggy's army starting to get attacked in the rear by the Earls of Dale, the other unit of cavalry. Maybe less scary than the Hammer Guard, but still an asset to have at this late stage. Another opportunity for the defenders to get a good amount of kills relatively quickly. Cavalry on the way forwards. Barrow-wights still standing. They have managed to contain the remnants of Froggy's army over here, the Trolls and the Hammer Guard in the end. Probably not going to be enough. I think just the fact that there are still enough pikes to keep the Hammer Guard at bay is the key. So they might just be able to squeak out a narrow victory here, the Dwarves. But that's most assuredly better than nothing. These Dragon Slayers trackers, I mean, we haven't really seen them use full volleys yet, so it's possible they still have all their ammunition, or at least the vast majority of it. But they really ought to be getting into a good position to try and use that, because like time is of the essence here. They're in danger of being the kind of unit which is saved for a moment that never comes. Dragon Slayers Varad Mithrin on the front line over here as well, looking a little bit more depleted now following their exertions on the other side against Froggy's Angmar army, now being tasked with trying to do the same against the Misty Mountains. Can you assume that's Boris's army being finally dealt with 2 times? Northern Miners fleeing, as are some of WK's battered and bruised units. To loop their shots high still, but being depleted means they have been able to sustain this arrow fire for longer. And I mean, the Dragon Slayers are on this front line as well as the Dalian Paladins. That's a lot of very high-end armor-piercing damage that this Misty Mountains force is now having to deal with. This is the first time they've really been stopped dead in their tracks. Slayer's trackers. Still, Froggy's forces refusing to capitulate, and just the fact that he's still got so many barrow wights left means it's kind of a given, really, that all of these units that are tied up over here having to deal with them are going to have to stay here until pretty much the end of the battle, you would imagine. It's a lot of resources which the defenders would probably like to use elsewhere. Once again, I would say the size of Erebor as a whole has actually harmed the defenders more than anything in this battle. Those initial losses, they weren't able to really help one another. They had to basically either commit to final stands or go for full retreats. There wasn't really anything in between, just because they knew that no help would be arriving quick enough to change any outcomes to battles. So they had to look pretty far in advance. Dale with a pretty tame downhill charge, but it is at least preventing any continued advance from these units over here. Cavalry almost running on the spot there. Down here, with infantry, the balance of forces is evenly matched. I mean, they can hold for a little while longer over here, the defenders. The combination of a few Dwarven pikes, a few Dalian spears, and paladins. But I mean, yeah, the paladins retreating. I don't know what they're retreating for, though. Honestly, there's nothing in the town centre that's worth retreating for, and I don't think you're going to get a much better defensive position than the one that you already have over here. It depends on what the paladins are actually going to be used for. But again, maybe another questionable choice from the defenders. Guardians of Kharndoom and Angmar Marauders slowly making their way up, more units as well in Angmar Halberds. Once again, the rank and file of the Orcs. Probably the most dependable performance we've seen from the likes of them for a good long while. Another hit from the Iron Ballista, this time into Snaga skirmishers, just tearing chunks off of the overall manpower levels, which is vital. Barrow wights, it says victory seems almost certain, but I kind of doubt that. Which Hammerguard actually being pulled off the front line. Maybe going to try and take another route in. Although Dragon Slayer's trackers are here as well. Should be enough to finish off the Hammerguard, considering how bloodied they already are. Close range throwing axe volley as well. Then the Dragon Slayer's trackers, with those big axes in melee as well, also will be able to return the favour in terms of armour piercing damage. The Barrow Wights continue to do their thing, continuing to show their value. Don't know if the Iron Ballista still has any more volleys left in it. It's a very thin line at this point. It says victory seems certain, but I think that's because the units at the very front of this push now are regular Goblin infantrymen. As soon as the Barrow Wights get to the front, and maybe something with a little more oomph is also there. It's the sort of front line that should be prized apart pretty readily. Although a fair amount of Snaga, not the best units still remaining. Battered and bruised Guardians of Kharndoom. I mean, with this amount still left in reserve, you have to back the attackers still. The defenders don't really have much in the way of infantry that they can shift positions with now. Dalian Royal Guard and Dalian Paladins fighting together, the best that Dale have to offer, and at the very least they will crush the regular Angmar, which we just got done praising, but this is definitely a bridge too far for them. Defeat is a distinct possibility. shaken as well, routing. Very much a possibility. Angmar halberds as well. Axe throwers moving across to try and maybe hasten the demise of them. The wind lance getting into play, so I guess the iron ballista is out of ammunition. There goes, finally, Froggy's general. Wind lance just about managing to arc their shots. Again, they're having to go after Snargo, but they may as well go after what they can at this point. Try and put as many dents into the attackers as they can. Try and increase the likelihood of mass routes. That's probably their best bet now. And the Barrow Wights finally isolated after the demise of those Witch Realm Hammer Guards. Dragon Slayer's trackers still over here. Still a few men here and there. Pikes still in good numbers, but again, they're all tied up on this one unit of ghouls at this point. They are going to need to finish them off quickly, you'd imagine. A little bit of friendly fire maybe going on. That's not ideal. The Iron Ballista crew now getting involved in melee as well. Having already done a good amount of heavy lifting. You'd certainly say that the defending artillery has played its part. The Iron Ballista may be a little bit more impressive than the Wind Lance. The Wind Lance still has a bit more time maybe to remedy that. Snargo. Still a bit of ranged ammunition as well in the hands of those Ironfoot crossbows, but it can't really be targeted at this point is the only problem that the defenders are going to have. They're just going to have to try and dump it and hope for the best, I think. Over here. Victory seems certain. Angmar halberds. I mean, this is, to be fair, where the halberds should be able to really earn their salt. If for no other reason than they should be able to get their formation into position, and they will lose, but they should take a little bit more time in losing. Not unlike the Barrow Wights in that regard, I suppose. I mean, the trolls getting thrown in. They will struggle against the Dalian Paladins in particular, but I guess at this point for the attackers, trying to finally break the defenders' resolve is paramount here. They've still got more in reserve over here as well, including Witch Realm Blackguard. What's this? Erebor Legionaries getting into place. I mean, I think the Iron Ballista crew are just Erebor Legionaries as well, so these are strong, stout-hearted dwarves that are now blocking the way. Further back, Blackback Mountain Berserkers as well, 75 of them. Sending forward more of the Barrow Wights, more Snarga. Across come the Dragon Slayer's trackers, fresh from their victory over the Hammer Guard on the other side. More pikes as well, doing what they can to help salve their wounds. The Barrow Wights are still alive over here is the problem. They've prized them away from this fight that they didn't want them caught in. But the Barrow Wights are still alive. And they're just advancing towards the town centre now. I mean, cycle charging from the Earls of Dale probably ought to be enough to finish them off. That should suffice, but we'll see. Not beyond the realms of possibility that maybe they win due to town centre capture. I don't think the defenders have got much choice though, other than to try and trust in the Earls of Dale to see them over the line there. All of their infantry is needed elsewhere to try and keep the attackers in check. Dalian Paladins certainly having the effect on the trolls that we thought they might. And the Halberds, staying standing a little bit longer than you would expect as well, so not bad from them. Oh, the classic. We nearly got through an entire battle without an artillery piece deciding to just wander off and slide down a cliff. But, alas, the Wind Lance in the final phases makes it so that that is not the case. Snaga trying to march calmly through what remains of the Dwarven defence over here, but Ironfoot Pikes will be there to greet them and do some significant damage. Further back, Black Orcs of the Mountains. Still plenty of decent quality units. I mean, Moria Halberdiers completely healthy as well. Moria Halberdiers, 253 of them. I think just through sheer numbers, they could just march forward and try and smash the dwarves to bits at this point. The main threat to that previously was the artillery pieces, and the Wind Lance has moved away and the Iron Ballista is out of ammo. Blacklocks. And now the Blackguard is still here. I don't know where the general is. Again, that might be the only hope the defenders have left to them at this point. We are approaching the end, having a look at the percentages. Yeah, I think in terms of a margin, that does make sense. Probably going to be about 15% when all is said and done. And it was that less than ideal start that the defenders made, unfortunately, when you're in a battle like this against forces that are capable of having huge armies like the Misty Mountains and Angmar. If you start getting into a downward spiral early, it can be very difficult to reverse that. It was valiant in the mid-game and the late game, I think, from the defenders to start fighting their way back into it, but it was a very deep hole they dug for themselves. It's not quite over yet, but they don't have the damage-dealing capabilities in terms of artillery anymore to be able to turn this one around in the time that remains, I fear. And for crossbows doing their thing. Still Dragon Slayer's trackers as well, wielding their weapons more like spears, interestingly enough. Stabbing with the slightly trident-esque end of their battle axes. The spear animation is good for a unit like that, though. They attack more quickly. It's what gives them their defensive properties. The best defense is a good offense, as they always say, and that is how it works with Medieval 2 spears. Alien Spearmen still alive. There's still 7 Barrow-wights over here. Bit of a footnote in the grand scheme of things now. 32 Earls of Dale still alive, but still doing their best. Thriving in their lane. There's not much in the way of Paladins left, only 5 of them ever since the Blackguard arrived on the front line, giving the Dalian bodyguard units a worthy foe. The quality advantage was, after all, what Dale were kind of relying on this front line over here, and that is slowly melting away now. And further back, Guardians of Kharndoom. Well, there we go. Well, there goes one of the Gimlis. The general model now for Erebor. Angmar halberds scuttling forwards. The announcer is really losing control now. The wind lances lay abandoned, and that is because the crew is sorely needed down here just to try and help hold on to these front lines for as long as possible now. Of course, it's not going to make a great deal of difference in the long run. Black Uruks of the mountains trudging forth. Crossbows out of ammunition now, just being thrown in. Seeing if they can get as many kills as they possibly can before the inevitable end. The Blackbacks, 73 still alive. I think they are the only bodyguard unit now which are completely untouched. The Goblin Kingsguard that are with them have taken a few losses. They're going to head directly to the town centre. What else is left? Those Ironfoot crossbows are routing. Ironfoot pikes are routing. The Earls of Dale are not, but I mean, I don't really know what they're going to be capable of doing from now. These Barrellites are still alive, and I don't think River Patrol are really going to be the sort of thing to finish them off. Nor one Dwarven Miner and 2 Axe Throwers. They may yet live until the very end of the battle. A real achievement for a unit like that. Guardians of Kharndoom will join them soon enough, and that's surely is that on this front line over here. Which leaves only the town centre. I think this is a ×2 job from now. Really just a case of mostly the Earls of Dale at this point. Because of their speed and manoeuvrability, they can get away a little bit more, although that might be the end of them as well. They're wavering. Are they going to... Well, they didn't actually rout there. They were wavering for quite a while in the face of quite a few units. They managed to stay in the fight. Alien Spearmen may be knocked back into active service. They didn't rout there, the Earls of Dale. It's a little bit weird, actually. They got absolutely eviscerated. You'd have expected them to rout, but I guess they were partially in the town centre, so they couldn't rout. There goes cannon fodder.
Our enemy has command of the city. Our allies are as unsteady as an egg on a stick. They flee the fields like cowards. We must look to our own men now.
A few of the Blackbacks are at least bloodied from this. A position where effectively the attackers had already won by the time they were committed.
Seems almost certain.
Alien Spearmen knocked back into existence, as have the Ironfoot Pikespin.
Our allies are as unsteady.
Players beginning to admit defeat now.
Our allies dead. Nothing. We have nothing to be ashamed of.
The final general falls, and that is going to be that. So in the end, the attackers did very, very well early on, and whatever the defenders did following that was not enough to be able to turn things around. And again, the vastness of the settlement, I think, was partially to blame for that. I mean, it's a part of this. It's a design feature of the settlement, though. It's supposed to be big on the inside with various parts of Erebor that are recognisable, like the forges, the walkways, you know, the feast hall, all of that. So I feel as though an apt phrase might be everyone's got a plan until they've got hit, because I think as soon as the initial defences started to be really seriously tested and started to fall apart, I think the defenders kind of panicked a little bit, and you could see they didn't really have a plan for what to do if the attackers started to make that level of progress that quickly. Yeah, and in the end the attackers were able to. I mean, Boris may well have had his army destroyed fairly early in proceedings, but everyone else was able to keep themselves going for a significant amount of time longer, and the amount of reserves they had as well were always going to be a problem. I mean, the defenders did their best, the artillery did its best, and the quality of the armies, but in the end, actually, something that I thought would work in their favour, having a more numbers-focused army with more of their rank and file, in the end actually didn't end up making the difference that I would have wanted it to, purely because the battlefield was made a little bit smaller when it became a fight for the treasure hoard and the throne room, and more quality would have been really necessary there. But again, it is what it is, and you can see the very different approaches that all of the defending armies had. Eclipse had a large dwarven army, like I just said. Sin had a far smaller quality-centric army, but maybe it was too far the other way, really, too small for it to be really universally useful throughout the field. And Dale, a little bit less of an extreme difference, but Cannon Fodder going for the quality, and WK going a little bit more for the rank and file. But again, if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that your entire army is on deck and ready to meet in advance, like the ones that Mr. Sneakman did through the side entrance, like the one that Froggy did through the walkways as well. But in the end, things were too disparate, and when that's the case, if you've got concentration of force, your regular units are not going to be enough to deal with the entirety of an Orc horde. So yeah, it is what it is. Let's see what did the damage for the dwarves. Erebor legionaries did well. I think that's not too surprising. It was late on when we really saw them, and by that point the battle was already pretty far away from them. But they did well enough considering the odds that were facing them. Crossbows, I mean 72 isn't enough for a unit of crossbows, to be honest. 214 is probably fine. Ironfoot warriors, again, you want more than that. Considering, I mean, there may be basic units, and breaking 100 kills for a basic unit could be considered okay, but considering the lower tier nature of much of what they were facing, you need more from your dwarven regulars. The Ironfoot pikes did okay though. One unit maybe less so, but the pikes were always intended to be more of an anchor. As for Sin's army, smaller, much smaller, so individually the kill count's going to be much higher. 657 on the Iron Ballista. Ironfoot Hammerguard did okay. They killed off quite a few of the crossbows, but I don't know. I mean, again, based on the tier of units that they're killing off, based on how expensive the Hammerguard are, I'd actually say that's not good enough. Blacklock Engineers did okay. Ironfoot Crossbows, that's more like it. Dragon Slayers, Trackers, I would say probably not good enough either. In spite of the fact this looks pretty impressive, I would say outside of the Legionaries, the Miners, and the Ballista, and the Pikes, really anything above this, all of the really high-end units actually, the Dragon Slayers, the Trackers, the Hammerguard, it's probably not enough. If you're going to have a small army like this, you need them to be absolutely flawless, really. And again, it's harsh to say, but it is. If you're going to bring an army like that, it needs to be that way. And unfortunately, again, it's one of those contributing factors, much like how the regular units for Dale and the Dwarves were not able to deal with entire armies bearing down upon them. If you're going to go for a more specialised army like that, and to a lesser extent that Cannon Fodder went for, you need to use them perfectly, and in the end that was not the case, and you can see how large the attacking armies were. Even the smallest attacking army from Froggy was equivalent really to the biggest for the defenders. So yeah, it was a good showcase though of Erebor as a settlement. As I've said, it's probably in terms of the new settlements that we've seen, the revamped ones, the largest in terms of an interior, and again, maybe the defenders should have used that a little bit more to their advantage, maybe retreating a little bit earlier, utilising some of the narrow spaces. We saw it a little bit in the Feast Hall, but maybe a little bit more was needed in order to really get the most out of their defensive positions, and also the Dwarves' defensive nature fighting on home turf. But in the end, perhaps a very good showcase, maybe more so of the Misty Mountains, even with how extreme their numbers were. But yeah. So a big thank you to Eclipse for sending this one in and allowing me to showcase it. We will have a couple more as well that I already have at my disposal. The next replay to come out will probably be the revamped version of Thranduil's Hall, so another revamped faction capital, this time Mirkwood. And following on from that, we have a regular settlement, actually. It's sort of intended to be almost like the regular settlements on a campaign map, and that's going to be another Dwarven-inspired map, this time Erebor being joined by their brethren from the Blue Mountains and from Khazad-dûm. So those will be the next two to come out. Following on from that, it's a little bit murky because I'll be doing the recording for everything else, I think, on the other side of the new year. So yeah, I think enough waffling from myself. Big thanks to all the players for being a part of this one and for crafting this map.